Well, thanks, Corey, and thanks for the opportunity to chat. Good to be together, co-hosting with you, two Spurs fans coming together in the. Thought you like that, Steve. No, seriously, thank you for the opportunity to chat. I mean, I think one of the things that we've learned from COVID-19 is the emphasis that organisations have had to put on internal communication. It's been forced on them, really. So, what I've been doing over the last 2 or 3 months is just tracking the research that's been done around internal communication associated with COVID-19. I've been speaking to the students that study the course that I lead, and just dropping in on various communities on LinkedIn and social media just to see what's been going on in terms of what internal comms people have been doing. And of course, what I'm going to talk about now is really just some of the verbatim things I've picked up. It's not based on any harder research that has been done. I mean, I think it will be great, and I think there will be some really good research that will come out of this. But what I'm going to be talking about really is just my observations and what I've picked up over the past 2 or 3 months. But I will kick off with some stats because I do like a bit of data. There is a lot of data around there in various places. But this is some figures that I picked up on yesterday, just to get us, started, if you like. So 87% of employees in one survey said they were satisfied with the way they were being kept informed about COVID-19. I think that points very firmly to what most people expect internal communication people to do, which is, keep employees informed and up to date about what's going on. And that's really what internal communication is best known for. So 87%, I don't think is, I think that's a pretty good result, really, all things being told. 68% of employees have said that they are confident in the approach being taken by leaders. Same study, quite a few, it's quite a robust study. Now, that points to, a little bit of, 32%, nearly a third of employees, clearly not having confidence in the approach being taken. I suppose that's also is understandable to a degree. 42% of employees say they feel anxious. 25% of employees say they feel demotivated. And again, I perhaps wonder if those figures might not have been a bit higher. The key issues that employees are voicing, firstly, and these are not surprising to us, they want to know what the plans are for the return to the workplace. And secondly, they want to know what the possibilities are for those of them who can work from home. They want to know what the possibilities are for them to work from home for longer periods of time. And, so this is the sort of things that are going on. In terms of what internal comms people have been telling me, there are 7 themes that I've picked out. I'll just run through them quickly, and I'm sure they'll prompt some more discussion. But firstly, and this is obvious really, that just the speed of communication, the way that they had to, in the early days in March, just had to be reacting, at speed to keeping employees informed with fast changing scenarios. Now, in the internal comms world, of course, we're used to communicating about changes, but usually it's, change projects that have been planned for some time. We work through things, we have time to get things checked and, verified, and often, unfortunately, multi-layers of sign off before stuff goes out to employees. And this was different. And it points to something that I think is something for me as a researcher, we've got to think about more seriously in the future, which is internal crisis communication planning. There's a huge body of work out there on how organizations communicate in a crisis to their external stakeholders. From an academic perspective and a researcher, there's not so much there. And of course, this was fairly new and unexpected. So just what systems we have in place, what processes there are, for communicating fast in a crisis that's unexpected. The key thing about that keeping employees informed, that employees say they want, or looking for is the reassurance point. And I was talking to somebody on Monday who was involved in, you know, an organisation that had immediately to make a significant number of employees redundant. You know, they made that decision very quickly. And what he said to me was the thing he emphasised right from the start was not to sort of sugarcoat this or try not to say anything about it. But his advice was, you know, to the leaders to say straight away, this is going to happen, this is why, and this is how we're going to do it, and these are the support mechanisms. You know, you have to get those hard messages out there right from the front, and then reassure people about what's going to happen through that whole process. So the employees are looking for reassurance. The second theme that comes out loud and clear, and again, this won't be a surprise to you, but it's the increased use of digital platforms inside organizations. So, you know, in truth, up until, you know, March this year, the way that employees adopt or participate in internal digital platforms, and by that I mean Yammer, Workplace by Facebook, Microsoft Teams, Slack, you know, there's a whole myriad of platforms out there, but the way that they've been adopted has been patchy at best, if you read the research on adoption of internal digital platforms. So some good successes in certain organizations, but the general picture is it's patchy. You know, certain teams in certain organizations adopt it and use it well, but in general, those platforms have been used as just another channel, if you like, to message employees. So obviously, because people are working from home, there's much more emphasis on discussion forums, being set up for employees. Of course, all the Zoom video conferencing and Microsoft Teams, you know, video conferencing that was used as well. But, you know, again, the guy I was speaking to on Monday said basically he set up straight away on their digital internal platform an anonymous forum. So a place where employees could just say, you know, exactly what they were thinking and feeling and raise their concerns, but anonymously. And I'm not an advocate for general anonymous, you know, employee forum discussions, you know, as an ongoing thing. But this worked for this scenario because it enabled people to really vent and get things off their chest and ask the questions perhaps they wouldn't normally feel comfortable about asking. So that's what he did on that internal digital platform. We've seen a lot more use of discussion forums. So, and this I think is going to continue. So we're going to see a shift, and much more internal comms taking place on internal digital platforms. The third point that comes through, and again, leadership, and I'm going to talk about leadership here quite a lot, leadership visibility. So by visibility, I don't just mean, you know, getting on to Zoom, you know, a lot. It's more than that. It's about leaders showing that they care. And you know, so this may be doing a weekly video, but it's more than just, you know, the messaging. It's just kind of like, and it has to be informal, you know, cut all the corporate slides, just be yourself. But what I'm hearing from internal comms people is that those senior leaders who are relatively comfortable with that sort of thing anyway, you know, took to it straight away. They got it, and they were very, you know, amenable to setting up weekly videos and doing them in that informal way. Other leaders who are more reticent generally about going out and being visible, you know, in a face-to-face environment, you know, not surprisingly, they were reticent about getting onto videos every week. But that was very important to employees. They wanted to be able to see what their leaders were saying on a regular basis on a video. The empathy point, again, you know, employees want to feel that their leaders really do understand what they're going through, what their concerns are. And this comes on to listening, and the way that I think the emphasis on internal communication during COVID-19, generally speaking, and again, I've no research to back this up, but it's just through my conversations, is that the emphasis has been, you know, predominantly on messaging, which is completely understandable at the start of the situation. But we, in internal communication, generally, I think, need to balance this messaging, broadcasting much more with listening. And that's certainly one of the ironic things I think that comes out of my conversations is a lot of the communication being sent out to employees was about well-being. So things that employees could do, support services, other help that's available for people, to if they need support with their mental health, whatever else. So communication about what employees could or couldn't do being sent to them. Whereas if leaders were to just actively listen more seriously, in itself, that act of listening, if you do it genuinely and openly and you respond, actually feeds into employee well-being in itself. So, so the point I'm trying to make is that the whole approach to internal communication at the start was absolutely right, fast, good, accurate, visible communication from leaders. However, what I have not seen really come through is the way that we embed listening into the internal communication that we do. But the anonymous online space that I mentioned earlier is a great example of that. And it's also ironic because internal digital platforms give far greater scope to listening to what employees and picking up on what employees are saying. So, the potential to analyze, what employees are saying on forum discussions and look at likes and so on and so forth on internal digital platforms is greater than the potential internal comms people have ever had, really, to analyze and listen to what employees are saying. However, probably for good reasons, because we're still working so fast on just getting messages out, we haven't really built that in. Two other things that have come out: pulse surveys have been used an awful lot. I hear a lot of use of quick, simple, weekly, monthly surveys to back up. So this is an example of listening. To kind of contradict my previous point a little bit, but those pulse surveys have been, I think, a good mechanism for tapping into employee thoughts and feelings. However, the difficulty, it's great to do a pulse survey, but we've not, the thing is, employers have got to see something happen, fairly quickly as a result of what they're saying. And the final point, which is an interesting one, is that I've heard of more peer-to-peer networks being set up. So employees have internal, if you like, social support systems being used. Again, this is on digital, internal digital platforms, but making connections across the organisation, so that people can share their stories of what they're doing or what's happening to them across the organisation. And that sort of peer-to-peer support network, I think, is something that has been used well. I think is something that we'll probably see continue into the future. So that's my roundup of how I picked things up. I think
yeah, there are tons of information to take away there. So thanks very much for that, Kevin. I think that the point that stood out for me was just the convergence of both crisis, leadership, and internal communications, and how all of them have really merged, and perhaps that was already happened, but has kind of accelerated in recent months. I think the point you made about leaders needing to show that they care, and not just listening to feedback, but acting on feedback is vital. Potentially even more so when there are wider societal issues going on, for the Black Lives Matter protest being an example of that. So I think, yeah, there's tons of really useful information to take away from that. So thanks very much for that. One question I had about generally the switch to remote working that we've all been experiencing over the past few months. In your view, what do you think is the long-term impact of that on internal culture? Do you think it strengthened, or it has potential to strengthen that, or are there any disadvantages that you feel are coming out of that and have been evident over the past few months?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all get zoomed out, don't we? And I think that there are lots of things we need to consider about whether if you're on Zoom for 4, 5, 6 hours of a day with webcam switched on like we are here, how does that affect you? And I'm not sure there's any really great research based on that happening in the last 3 months. But I think it's obvious, isn't it? We all know it ourselves that it's only so much Zooming you can do in a day. So I think the other key point, and there is a little bit of research on this, is what's the optimum work from home, work in an office balance? And I did come across some academic research into this based on some research done a couple of years ago. And they really came to the conclusion that it was 2.5 days in the office, 2.5 days at home. And of course, that points to the obvious need that we all have for that, face-to-face kind of interaction, and the benefits that people get out of just bumping into someone in a corridor, and having that spontaneous chat, and we miss that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think the research you alluded to about people wanting to know what the long-term working from home options are plays into that. I think there'll be a lot of people in those positions as we go forward. We published some research ourselves a couple of weeks ago looking at the return to the office, and what that found was that the industry is fundamentally split between those who are desperate to return and those who are really reluctant to. So I was just wondering what thoughts you had, if any, on what business leaders and CEOs and those responsible for making those decisions can factor into their decision making when planning for a return in the coming months.
It comes back to the whole well-being thing, doesn't it? It's about, I think there are still very legitimate concerns that I'm picking up from employees about what is exactly going to be done about social distancing in office environments, and also other environments. How exactly is it going to work? What's going to be the process? Is it going to be, are the offices going to be open for longer? Sort of 8 o'clock in the morning through to 8 o'clock at night, and people come in different waves. I think it's about, to be honest, I think what business leaders have got to do is they've got to provide the answers and the detailed reassurances that not all, but a significant number of employees will have. And then of course it goes beyond that, because certainly if you're in London like I am, and certainly in other parts of the country too, how comfortable are employees going to be in getting back onto public transport?
Yeah.
And they have to build that in. So it's all those concerns that we know employees have, and leaders are going to have an answer to those points, because that's the basic level. There's the hygiene factor. Employees won't get over that until they know what those reassurances are.
A quick question from Carmel, who's asking about the research that you've alluded to. Is there anywhere we can find out more information about that online? Is any of it published yet, or are there any plans to do so in the future? Sure.
No, that's a good question. I can pop you I've got several sources of research that I've been collecting. It's all freely available online, so I can just gather those links up, Corey, maybe, and just pop them back to you. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, that's probably the easiest thing. If you send that to me, I can pass those on.
Okay, sure.
One more question for me. One of the other things you mentioned was the importance for leaders to get the hard messages out initially and then work towards reassuring staff. And it seems as though it's quite a mainstream topic now for leaders. It's something that's very much on their radar as a really crucial part of a leadership role. And would you agree that the last few months have kind of the stock of internal communication has risen quite dramatically, and people are really beginning to see how important this really is? And I asked this to someone who's obviously been working on internal communications for a very long time. Do you feel like finally people are starting to get it?
I mean, that is a really interesting question. And I think, when you look at the conversations that are going on LinkedIn community groups, for internal comms, there's a lot of chatter about, the recognition that's being given to internal comms at the moment. There are some wonderful stories about the work that internal comms people have done, and the way that they've now got the ear of the chief exec or the board that they didn't quite have before, because they're it's just kind of immediate stuff you need to go and talk to those people about. So, however, comes with a huge caveat, because personally, I wonder if the recognition being given is just for the ability to, and I say just, I'm not decrying this at all. It's the recognition is being given for people being able to act quickly, to respond quickly to communications, to being able to get stuff out through a wide range of channels effectively, to be able to adapt to doing stuff on digital. I think it's great that internal comms people have done that, don't get me wrong at all, and it really shows our value in the people crisis, and hopefully we'll be doing much more sort of serious stuff like that as we go on. However, and the caveat here is, it's not recognition for internal comms being seen as what I would call a important strategic function for the organisation. It's not, so we're being seen as being good at putting copy together quickly, or organising internal digital events quickly, all that kind of stuff, which is great stuff and really absolutely fantastic. However, the value for internal communication is in raising levels of employee engagement, doing communication that goes beyond just messaging, because the value that you get from doing this listening stuff and getting leaders to be more human, more personal, more visible, and involving employees and doing the listening things I've talked about earlier, that's where the real value add comes, from the work of internal comms. And I just don't think that's what we've been doing as much as the messaging. So the recognition is great, but is it for the right things? That's my question. I'm not sure.
It's a really interesting point, because you're right in that the vast majority of work being undertaken, as valuable as it is tactical in its focus. So really interesting to see whether or how it impacts the perceptions of internal communications amongst the C-suite in the long term. It'll be interesting to see. Conscious of time, are there any questions that anyone would like to ask of Kevin? We've had one from Julia Hurd on the chat. She says, have you noticed a change in the way that other departments work with internal comms, for example, HR, and the way that employees use internal platforms? Example being Black Lives Matter has caused a lot of debate among staff.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and it's a great question. And I didn't talk about, equality, inclusion, and diversity, which is also, something that's has to be addressed more seriously within organisations. And of course, internal communication people have got a big role to, to support organisations in doing that and communicating what is being done. So, I mean, listen, I don't know the answer to how other departments are working with internal communication.
All right. Yeah, you.
I haven't got an answer to that one, but I can try to find out. It's not something that's come up in my conversations, so I'm not really sure about the answer to that. I think the second part of the question was about digital platforms, I think. So
yes.
I think this is probably actually where the shift in internal communication work will happen. From what was going on pre-COVID to what will happen next year, it will be undoubtedly, in my mind, a far greater use and adoption of internal digital platforms, but in a much better way, a more systematic way, a broader way, and that will, I think, change the nature of internal communication itself, because inevitably for me, a lot of that communication is going to be employee-led on forum discussions or peer-to-peer communication, rather than internal comms people creating content. Of course, we'll still do that, and we'll still put it out through digital platforms, but it shifts that, because our role now becomes much more, so who's going to be monitoring, and I mean monitoring in the right way, who's going to be looking at what employees are saying on those forums and summarizing it, categorizing it, analyzing it, and feeding it back in some meaningful way to leaders so that they can then respond to it. So it changes our role in a good way, I think, personally, because it adds that kind of more strategic element to what we do. We're not just creating content now, we're actually curating and analyzing content and making that a useful resource for organizations. I do think that's the big change that we will see.
That's a really interesting point. I think it will be fascinating to see how the practice evolves, and I think creating those forums and facilitating discussion will be as important as a lot of the tactical things that we focused on. Are there any final questions from anyone before we wrap up?
I did have one, just following on your opening comment, Kevin.
What about Tottenham?
Yeah.
I'm shutting that one down straight away, Steve.
The fact that Tottenham Hotspur did furlough quite a few of its staff, but I wasn't going to focus on that. My main question is, do you think that they will make the cut for the Champions League? Yes or no?
Sorry, you're going to have to repeat the question, Steve, because I've completely lost it.
Do you think Tottenham will make the cut for the Champions League, or will it be a failure?
I think I'll place Steve on mute just there. I think we're out of time. But
that actually looks like a Charlton scarf to me, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we can always take acknowledge that Spurs will finish above Arsenal, as has been the case for the last few years. So, thank you very much for that, Kevin. I found that really fascinating, and I'm sure a lot of our other audience members did as well. So, well, thank you very much for your time.